Hey everyone, glad to be back. Took a little bit of a break because of, the holidays and the craziness and got caught up on some recording and planned interviews. So I've got a lot of cool stuff coming up. However, what you're going to hear shortly, is part one of a two-part series that I did with Josie Hellebore. We talk about Satan, Baphomet, Hecate, some, of course, left hand path stuff. So it was a lot of fun to talk to her. And 2 hours went by very fast. So decided to split that up into two parts. And I did want to say that she's since changed her Instagram handle. So if you want to find her while you're listening to this, she's on Instagram at Hill Country Hellebore. And I will put a link to her stuff in the description so that you can find her easier. But if you hear anything that's like, hey, go find her on this, and you don't have a resource, it's because I took those out so that you didn't look for her and it didn't exist anymore. But with that being said, before the episode starts, let me go ahead and read out our patron shout outs. For Haints, we have Corian Lane of New World Witchery, Joanne, Melissa D, Chris of Pagan Ironworks, Ashley C, Amanda F, Mary, Allison, Aura, Shannon, Alex, Ashley, M, Lilith, Liz, Amanda of Bellfire Apothecary, Salvo Sea Witch, Cryptid Baddie, Lorraine, Nightgeist Podcast with Erica and Liana Nightgeists. I think that's their last name. And then we have Jason and Melanie of Spooky Charlotte. For Poltergeist, we have Rachel the Pickety Witch, Temple, Luna, Heather, Avael, Jessica, Tiffany, Stephen, Zach, the Church Grim, Stephanie, Emily, Jen, Nessie, Wednesday, Mina, and Ashley of Cryptid Coven Creations. And then our super special Phalian, she's not that special, but we do love her. It's Brett Manning in our Phalian tier. So thank you all for your support. Couple things we do have for the Hex Files side of things. Some early access to the live show that we did, and so that's up through a unpublished link through YouTube. So when you click to watch that, make sure to subscribe. I think that's for 5 and up, but make sure you subscribe to our YouTube because that will be public at some point. We're gonna make you wait for it. No, but we do like to give perks to our patrons, and then have a lot of other investigations with Hex Files coming up that you do not want to miss. So check out the Hex Files podcast, and then our Patreon for bonus stuff from us and from Cursed here, of course. And then I do have a little bit of a bonus segment that I pulled out of this episode that will be on Patreon next week, where I fall in a rabbit hole about like discussing the gender fluidity possibly of Hecate slash Baphomet got us into this. But anyway, it's a few minutes. It didn't fit in this, and I thought it's worth posting in Patreon. So if you want more after this, go check that out. So here's that interview, and hope you enjoy part one. Welcome to Cursed. I'm Bones, and today I have a special guest on, Josie Hellebore.
Yep, that's it.
Okay.
Yep, Hellebore.
I was like, I remember when you were announcing your pin name, and
yeah. And Meg from Witch With Me is actually the one that helped me decide on Hellebore.
yeah, we've got a little bit of an Instagram group chat with some other people, and it's been fun. And it's actually been going on for over a year now, I think, but it's fun.
Yeah, I think it's been a year, which is kind of crazy.
But it's nice because it's a good place to like swap ideas and like network and things like that, and also a good way to alert people when things are stolen, like
Yes.
posts and Instagram shit, which is
Right.
happens all the time. But
Sure.
so we wanted to talk about Satanism with you all, but I don't think, correct me if I'm wrong, Satanism doesn't really like cover everything we want to touch on, right? It's not just Satanism.
Because I mean it's such a broad umbrella. Then there's so many different subsects underneath that umbrella. But yeah, definitely want to explore outside of that as well.
Yeah. So, for those who don't know, tell us a little bit about yourself in practice. Doesn't have to be long, but
I write under Josie Hellebore. I, write a lot of blog posts and things like that. Haven't been writing a lot lately, but that is the pen name that I use. And
yeah.
so as far, oh, go ahead, sir.
Oh, I was just gonna say, I'm gonna if you want to check out her shop, she's got some cool new Baphomet things that
Mm-hmm.
she makes, and I'll put all of these awesome links in the show notes.
Yeah, I've got some cool stuff. I've got some cool new stuff that I'm going to be making. I actually just kind of cleaned up my office yesterday, because I mean, I know that you're going to be airing this later, but we're recording it, December. So I just finished all of my Yule crafts for the year. So like I'm officially done. Like at this point, does it make sense to keep making wreaths? Like people have, they've decorated at this point. So
Yeah.
now I get to like kind of shift into some newer stuff that I've been wanting to work on, but I've kind of like forced myself, you got to wait, do the holiday stuff while you can do it. So I've got some other new stuff that I'm going to be putting out that I'm pretty excited about, some new jewelry and things like that. So I'll
Yeah.
be working on that soon.
Yeah, we're actually editing this end of December, or recording this at the end of December, because I'm going to take a little break, catch up on some recordings with other people, things like that. And, holidays get busy and no one really listens all that much during the holidays. So, but if you want, you can go back and listen to all the others. But yeah, it's cool because you just sent me some of those the other day and you were like, oh, these are new. And you've probably seen,
Yeah.
you follow Cursed, you've probably seen them get shared and stuff, and you've probably seen things like that in the stories. But it'll be good because after this will be a two-parter. After this, you'll worship Satan, and then you'll want some cool left hand made path thing.
Yes, absolutely. You'll need some decor for your new Hail Satan altar.
Oh no, I was just gonna say. So, what do you describe yourself as? I mean, I'm gonna be that person that's like, oh, put a label, but not really. But like, what do you describe your practice as? Do you describe it as left hand path?
I do describe it as left-hand path. I do identify as a satanic witch, and that's kind of something that it's relatively new in the sense that like I was always really into the darker aspects of my craft and paths, that were there, but I kind of had this apprehension. Am I delving too far into the darkness, and I kind of had to work through that. And so a little bit over like a year ago, I was just like, you know what, like fuck it, like it is what it is. I'm dark. I'm
Well,
just going to embrace it.
yeah, it's like a calling. It happens
Right.
and it's like it nags at you. And the same thing with Hecate. When I started, you do the 101 stuff and you look her up, and that was over 10 years ago. And then you're kind of like, wait, like I don't want to go, like I'm very intrigued by this darker side and things like that. And you're like, well, no, I don't want to fall in. And then do it. When you do it, you realize like, fuck it, like that's why I'm being pulled. And
Right.
we've been taught that there's this scary side to cursing and Satanism and all this stuff. And we're going to talk about the different angles, but specifically in witchcraft, it's still kind of taboo to talk about Satanism.
Right. Or, any kind of left-hand path stuff. And I remember when, I also identify as a Hecatean, which so I work with Hecate as well and have for several years now. And I think that, in many ways that she led me to where I am now and kind of opened those doors for me. But I've seen, I remember years ago when you said you worked with Hecate, it wasn't like it is now. She was very much more associated with the darkness and the darker aspects. And, people would just say, oh, she's the goddess of witchcraft and goddess of the underworld. And that's kind of it. And whereas now, and it's not necessarily a bad thing, but I have noticed that her image as it is portrayed on social media, mainstream wise, has kind of gotten a little, it's gotten a little softer and a lot more light aspects to it. But I remember
Yeah.
when it wasn't, so much like that. I'm sure you do too. You've been working with her for 10 years. And it was kind of more of, she was considered one of the, I don't want to say taboo goddesses, but just one of the more obscure for sure.
Well, you would
Um,
say, yeah, you would say like, oh, she's this crone goddess of witchcraft, and be very careful with you work with her and
mhm.
not
Yes,
lightly.
she's jealous. She's jealous. I remember hearing that. She's jealous and vengeful. And, if you work with any other deities, she's going to smite you. And it's like,
right.
not been my experience at all.
And it's like, don't ever like talk to her and then like ghost her because blah blah. And I've found out in my working, it's like I can see why people conflated that. Maybe it was partly like gatekeeping, like, oh, I'm like the cool kid who works at
Yes.
Hecate, nobody else can. But she's she's very I mean, she's like a goddess of the marginalized. She's very
Hmm.
um like tied with like justice and things like that. But that doesn't mean, and especially I'm like, well, now if somebody says, well, what if I call on Hecate and I decide to stop working with her? Will she be mad? She ain't gonna give a fuck. Like,
No.
I really think it's like, well, if you're going to work with me, you're working with me. I will find somebody else to like, so I don't think that that's the thing, but um yeah, I figure this first part we'll talk about like kind of all those taboos and those reasons. And then like maybe in the second part we'll get into maybe your more personal practice and kind of like,
Yeah.
the things. And we also talked about we want to get into the which I don't think it's a secret. There's a lot of misogyny that like is threaded into modern day like Satanism and things like that. And there's some people to blame for that, or at least the
Right.
for that.
Right.
Um,
Yeah. Like it's kind of being revamped, and I think TST is really helping with that revamping of the image. But yeah, the OG modern Satanism definitely got a lot of misogynistic undertones. We can thank one guy for that, and then he of course inspired many others to
no,
carry that torch. And I just want to say one thing, like I don't want to go too far down the Hecate rabbit hole if you don't want to, but one thing too, and you touched on it, is that Hecate will get mad if you work with others. I'll tell you that, like, for me, my experience has been completely different from that. If anything, Hecate has always empowered me to seek and search more, thirsting for knowledge of other deities, and like what's the right path for me. There's times throughout all the years I've been practicing where I learned about a lot of different things. Like I was really curious about ATRs at one point, DTRs, so like African traditional religions, and I learned a lot about those and studied those. Hecate didn't mind at all. I like I said, she kind of led me to where I am now with Satanism, and then Lilith is another deity that I feel that she led me to. And what's funny is that one thing that I wanted to, I know we were talking about like resources and stuff, and possible like book references. I've got this book. People ask me a lot about stuff for Lilith, because while there's quite a bit of stuff about Hecate now, there wasn't before, but Cindy Brandon's kind of really helped with that, I think. Brought some really good perspective into Hecate and bringing that to the public eye. Lilith kind of remains lesser known, like a little bit more in the shadows. I think she's becoming a more popular deity that I do see on social media, people working with. But if anyone, the questions I get asked most about are Lilith. If I do any posts about Lilith, my DMs always blow up like, how can I learn about her? Because there's just so much out there about her, and there's different aspects of her, kind of like the adversary, or Satan, the devil aspect, archetype. There's a lot of different translations and stories of origin of the adversary role throughout history and throughout different cultures, and the same is for Lilith as well. But I have this book, and it's a pretty interesting book. I actually got it gifted to me. I did a witch swap last year, which was really fun. And I got it gifted to me through that. And it's called Lilith, Goddess of Sitra Ara. And it's kind of hard to read. Like the editing is not done well. It's not just grammatically. I think maybe the person that wrote it, English might not be their second language, and the editor didn't really translate it well. It just, so you kind of have to, you can figure out context clues, like what they're trying to say, but sometimes you'll have to go back and read a paragraph again, like, wait, what? Okay, got it.
Yeah, I
But
think we've all read those like pagan witchcraft books that were not edited well.
yes.
And you just
Yes.
got to power through.
Yeah, you got to power through, and you just got to get what you can out of it. But there's this whole chapter in that book, and I thought this was really interesting, because when I started realizing that I was getting pulled more to this darker side, my question has always been, well, where does Hecate fit in all of this? Where's the common thread? Like, where's the connection? And chapter in this book talks about how Lilith and Hecate are not, while they're not the same goddess at all, they're totally different entities. They refer to them as the red serpent and the black serpent, and how they're both mother archetypes that are completely like different mother archetypes. And this book actually goes on to say that Hecate is like the mother of all, creator, source of the universe, which kind of reminds me of, you know, like studying Cindy Brandon stuff, the Anima Mundi
Yeah.
concept, right? That epithet of Hecate. And so I was like, wow, that like, for me, when I read that, I was like, oh, it's all making sense. There is a connection there. And I've been trying to find more and more about it. And it was just this random chapter in this book, but it just talked about how the two are kind of like conjoined in that. There's the two different serpents. And I thought that was really, really neat, and wanted to like touch on that a little bit.
Now, yeah. Now, where the path for me goes is like, you know, I still work with Hecate, and like I was telling you, the further I'm into it, and for a while, it's kind of like, you know, I just don't really. I guess technically I'm under the pagan term, but I don't really like that title. And I
Right.
just kind of like witch, and or if somebody asks, I'm like Hecatean. But again, it's, you know, it's a goddess who is of the mysteries of knowledge of light bringing, which is familiar, and a goddess that is a goddess of witchcraft. So of course, why
Right.
would she have any, like, why would she like put you in her bubble? She wants you to go out there and like leading you to other deities, whether you decide to work with them or not, or just learn about them, in and of itself is like the whole point. Like, you know what I mean?
Right. Yeah, absolutely. I feel the same way. And so that's why whenever I've, you know, remember hearing in the past people saying that she's jealous, I just I don't get that at all. I've never gotten that. Just
That
she's
just sounds
completely the
like
opposite.
more like patriarchal religious bullshit to me. Um,
Either that, or maybe, you know, maybe Hecate just really didn't I don't know, maybe she didn't want to work with that person. I don't know, you know, maybe that was
but there
her
was,
way
yeah,
of kind of
I
saying
remember
this
seeing
isn't the
all,
road for you.
I remember seeing all that, and it was like, oh, you know, you better make sure like your altar isn't shared with another deity that Hecate doesn't
Yes.
like, and it's
Yes.
um, I never got that feeling, but you know, as a witch starting out, especially back then, and I think it is different, but there is a, I don't know. I mean, I've seen Hecate as this like lighter goddess and things like that. Not light, but you know, like very caring and nurturing.
Absolutely. Yes.
But yeah, that doesn't mean that she's, you know, not a dark goddess. But yeah, Lilith, I've had interest in Lilith, so I would love to get more into that too with the because Lilith is always tied to Satan. Um,
Mhm. Mhm.
because that's just, I mean, I don't know because that's not my area of study, but is that only because of, you know, the biblical connections, or, you know, were they actually tied to, because there's so many different versions, and I can't wait to get into it, but there's different versions of the devil, um
Right.
and lore of the devil, and I for one, without that whole like every deity is the same deity, godhead, blah, blah, like maybe at one point
Oh yeah.
they kind of funnel together, but they're separate identities, and how they and how they, you know, appear to you might be different than the next person, but that doesn't mean that you can just, I think you lose some of the special work you can have with particular deities if you say they're all the fucking same. Now there's a
Oh,
bunch of,
absolutely.
yeah, there's a bunch of ties and connections to them, and that doesn't mean that that's, you know, that I'm not saying that to negate all of those connections and stuff, but yeah, I think the like the idea of the dev, like they're all kind of tied together, like that, like the old horned one, the nature,
Mhm.
like the dark aspect, and then straight up, and I mean, of course, I like the Satan. I love like visuals and stuff of like, you know, the like fuck God, fuck church kind of idea, because like I think that appeals to us in the rebellious, you know, point, even though I don't think people really see that work with, you know, and maybe they do, but I, you know, that's not necessarily, you don't have to have an upside down Jesus on a crucifix for
Right.
anything other than just decor, which is fine.
Right.
But
Right.
yeah, you don't have to do all that shit to work with this like horned one and like these energies and stuff. And yeah, I mean, I felt that pull to work with this like this deity that like calls to you, and it's like the horned one or the devil. And like, I mean, I love a good like folk song about the devil and all the different things like it, that tied to it. So yeah, I think it changes between like the Church of Satan idea, and the LaVey idea, and obviously there's the Bible's idea and all this stuff. So there's so many different aspects. But what do you kind of like, if you could narrow down your path, like what
You know,
genre of devil do you work with?
yeah, I get where you're going, because there, we've talked about this before. You've got non-theistic Satanists, which is your
Yeah.
Church of Satan and the Satanic Temple, where they use the figure to represent the
Mhm.
adversarial role, but they're not in any way working or believing in Satan as an entity or a literal being.
Right.
But
Yes,
then you've
that's
got like
like-
Luciferians, and then you've got other people that identify as Satanists, and sometimes you'll see them say, "We're the real Satanists." Like there's like, you'll see like troll stuff going back and forth if you like look on TikTok or something. If someone like posts some TST stuff, like people on there getting offended, like we're the real Satanists, and they're Satanists that do. I mean, I don't want to say worship Satan, because when you say worship Satan, like even if somebody does believe in Satan as a literal entity, and all of my research I've done, I have never found where worshiping Satan is a thing. Like any kind of Satanism always is like about empowering yourself and not worshiping an entity. Like that's the whole thing. Like the whole
Mhm.
thing is that Satan is supposed to represent enlightenment. That's what Lucifer, morning star, the light bringer. So you'll hear Luciferians say that. And what they're saying that is because in their perspective, the enlightenment that Lucifer brought to Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden was to not be living in ignorance. He gifted them with knowledge, and free will and those things. So in that sense, he's the light bringer and the bringer of knowledge.
Yeah.
So it's like a perspective thing. So a
Right.
lot of Satanists, regardless if they're theistic or non-theistic, it's going to be they believe that the oppressor is God. God is the oppressor, whereas Lucifer, Satan, and then there's a lot of, well, Satan isn't really Lucifer, and they're two different. And I'm going to be honest, like you can go down whole rabbit holes with that, and I haven't delved too deeply into that, so I won't pretend that I have. And maybe there's some people that know. I'm sure there's some people that know a lot more about that specific than me. I'm not the type of person, I haven't like studied the Bible, you know, I won't say religiously for lack of a better word, but I was raised Catholic and I have a fundamental understanding of the Bible, and I'm familiar with many of the Bible stories, right? I did grow up in that environment. However, I'm not a theologian by any
Right.
means. Like I'm not an expert in that.
Right.
So, those kind of people have a better insight into the difference between Lucifer and Satan and why they're different or why they're the same or if they are or whatever.
Yeah.
For me, I find myself in this strange mix, and I've talked to other satanic witches that feel the same way. It's like I'm in this weird mix between non-theistic and theistic. So I can't say that I'm a complete non-theistic because I'm not an atheist. So a lot of people that are Church of Satan or the Satanic Temple, like those kind of Satanists, they're atheists. But
Yeah.
I don't believe, I mean, I believe in science, but I also believe in, the possibility of something else existing. And my lived experiences don't allow me to believe in an atheistic thought process. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like I
Yeah.
just had too many, like, I mean, I'm a witch. You know what I mean? Like I practice magic, I do spells, I do rituals. I've had, experiences with spirits and entities and working with different deities. And so my experiences will not allow me to believe that way. That being said, I don't like to say that I'm like Luciferian or completely theistic Satanist, because I don't believe, I believe that there's definitely, gods and deities throughout the history of the world. I don't believe that the Christian God is like the one true God. I have a hard time believing in it. I think it's a really well woven story, but the fact that it came along thousands of years after people had existed and had already been working with other deities
Yeah.
and gods and pantheons, it kind of leads to some a lack of credibility, in my opinion.
Right.
So to say that I would be theistic Satanist I would have to acknowledge the Christian God as being true and real. And that's the part of it that I don't agree with. But what I will say is I do believe in the adversary and the many manifestations throughout cultures and history that the adversary has come through.
Right.
Michael Ford actually wrote this book called Luciferian Witchcraft, and it's a huge book. I'm like not even done with it, but he goes through and he talks about the adversary in different places in history and the different stories. And it gets kind of crazy. He does talk about Cain and Abel, and how like Cain was said to be actually Lilith's son. It gets wild. Like allegedly Cain was Lilith's son, and that he was like the first practitioner of Satanism, like Cain was. So I mean,
Yeah.
the adversary has been in history time and time again, and the adversary is just the person, or the entity I should say, the being, that that stands up to the oppressor, the one that questions everything, the ultimate seeker. Like, I'm not going to just take what you say for as for what it is. I'm going to question and why, and where's the evidence, and if you're doing something wrong, it doesn't matter if you're in a position of power, you should be held accountable for that.
Right.
And that's how I kind of view Satanism to me.
Yeah, well, see, I mean, I grew up in a Christian household, and it was Baptist, so there was a lot more of the. They actually talk about the devil more than anything else, because that's
right, the enemy.
Yes, they work on fear, of course.
Right.
And so, like, the idea of Satan prior to what we call Christianity today was really not an issue. It was, I mean, Christianity today takes the origin story, and kind of, I mean, they took that from Judaism,
Mm-hmm.
and it's and that even you can go and find, it's like, well, yeah, that was kind of like the whole story of this and this and this. And so there's all that blending. But yeah, I think what we know as the devil today was not a problem back then, and it certainly wasn't this. I think it was viewed more as, well, he's this person that might like a trickster, but he wasn't gonna like torture you for eternity. And it wasn't until, like I said, I mean, I've done research. It's been a long time since I did, but the idea of hell and stuff seems to come from like almost this pagan tale of a place that's on fire and all. And so it was like, this stuff was retconned in like George Lucas style back into like this shit, so that at some point it's like, oh, there's always been God and the devil. But that's not true, because
that's not true. Yeah.
And then the devil took on this like kind of the appearance of Pan, and because the horned one, and it's like all these pagans worshiping these goat men and fucking horns and
right.
and fucking like running around the forest like with hard-ons, like that was like their thing, right? And they're like,
right.
no, not us, that's that's the devil. So yeah, it's not to say that, oh well, these people are believing that there's this guy in red tights with horns and a pitchfork, or this like demonic like horned fucking like monster. But I think there's people that view it as that. And I think for me, in my experience, like the idea of the devil and Satan is like, it's kind of fluid. And I think that entity, deity, being, whatever you want to call it, can manifest itself in those ways. But I think at the core is like what you said, it's about knowledge and free will and fighting back against an oppressor. And I mean, the Bible lays it out. It's like, see why this guy's bad is because he fucking wanted you to think for yourself, man. Like, don't listen to him. Like you said, the kind of, I guess, the overall archetype idea is that knowledge and that light bringer. And that's what I think you can get into connections with Hecate when you talk about the fact that she's a torchbearer and light bringer, and a goddess of knowledge and mystery, and a key holder to all this. And I think that's to me, those things, I feel like I was called to Hecate, but those things speak to me because I love mysteries and I love exploring and learning. But what you said too about like the what mainstream people I think don't understand is like, and I don't know, maybe it sounds cliche, but at this point, but no, though there's the atheistic Satanists who, are, it's like hell yourself, self-empowering. It's like we're not actually worshiping a literal thing. We are using it as a symbol. And then you have the people who are like, and that's what you can't, if the true like Satan worshipers, I'm using quotation marks, that actually want to work with that Christianized version, there are those people out there. But like you said, when you do that from that viewpoint, you're acknowledging that that pantheon exists. And for me, I don't believe that it does, not in the way that they claim it to. I think
Right.
Whether Jesus was real or not, and conflated like all these other stories around the time with the same kind of, copy and paste story with a different hero. It's kind of like, okay, well, that aside, the God of the Bible can, I don't know. I think it's a being that might have some kind of life force and energy, whether it's just its followers and just the practices they're doing. But yeah, I'm never going to give credence to that pantheon. I'm sorry. So I'm not going to, other than the symbolism of that version of Satan. And it's fucking cool. It's metal. Like, I
The
love it.
aesthetic is great.
Yes, the aesthetic is great. I love it, but I don't put stock into if I'm working with the horned one and like it's not going to be the Bible's idea of Satan. Although I
Right.
think that doesn't mean you can ignore the whole story about that, because I think the idea of like the knowledge bringing in stuff, and I'm not familiar with that book. I do have we just talked about the Book of the Witch Moon by Michael Ford.
Uh-huh.
And I wasn't crazy about like the approach to Hecate. And we had kind of talked about like how it was kind of problematic about the Lilith,
Right.
how
Yeah,
that,
there's a lot of stuff in there that I don't like about the way, we were talking about the misogynistic undertones. I mean, Lilith is being referred to as the whore and harlot, and it's always slut shaming. It's always, this
to me
it's
things like,
anti woman, and it's and you're describing a goddess. Lilith is a goddess and an archetype that expresses her sexuality freely and without inhibition and embraces it and empowers others to do so. So to
which is
call her a whore and a harlot is I don't
which
know,
why
counterintuitive.
yeah, why it scares men like that, because it's just repeating what the church does. I mean,
Right.
that's what it is like. And I don't know if you're trying to say, well, when you talk about Revelation and the harlot and all this, and it's like, okay, well, I understand if you're trying to use that in like, I'm going to reclaim this imagery and to be anti-church and anti-religious, but at some point that only goes so far if that was your angle. And then like you said, it gets into slut shaming and stuff, and it's like embracing that and what Lilith calls to embrace, and what she, it's like it. Yeah, I mean, and that runs rampant, I'm sure, through satanic communities, but that doesn't mean that you should necessarily ignore the works per se. But I think you should be aware that if it feels weird, it probably is. You know what I mean? Like, you're gonna
Yes,
find that when
yes.
you explore shit. Like, you're gonna find that, and like I said, we can touch on LaVey if you want to, but yeah, there's a reason it kind of comes from that. um, but I think people confuse the energy of the devil and Satan, and that
Hmm.
idea of like, do what thou wilt, and like, um, like you said, there's a lot of contradictory shit in there.
Right.
In some of the practices, but you have to, you should be aware, if you're going into that and you're not a misogynist and you don't like those things, you should be aware that that's going to be in there.
Yeah, so there's like some breakoffs. There's some breakoffs of the original Church of Satan, right? And I know that Temple of Set is one, and then there's another one, and gosh, I need to research what that other one is. But one of them, one of the two, and I don't want to misspeak, and so I'm not sure if it's Temple of Set or the other one, but that one of these two breakoffs is like they're into the fact that they embrace all of the negative shit and the negative stereotypes out there about like the devil, like evildoer, and they kind of like buy into that, and that's the image they want to portray. Like they want to be like, and I don't want to misspeak, so I'm not sure if it's Temple Set or if it's nine Ingalls, maybe maybe it's that. I'm not sure. I'll have to do some research, but one of those, it's a break off. The Order of the Nine Angles. It's either Order of the Nine Angles or Temple of Set. One of those two. You know what? I think it is Order of Nine Angles. I looked it up real quick, and it says that their criminal activities they're associated with are right-wing terrorism, murder, sexual assaults, child abuse, and child prostitution. So,
you want to make sure you get the right one, because we
yeah. Right. But I just looked that up, and that's what came up, you know, online. So it's considered a neo-Nazi, like satanic cult, which is freaking crazy. So there's that aspect, but then, you know, I don't want people to be scared and think that all like Satanism is this horrible thing, because you've also got, on the other side of that, you've got groups like the Satanic Temple that they're non-theistic Satanists, and they're doing a lot of good. They're doing a lot of good for communities. They have different chapters all over the country, and different chapters have different campaigns, like Menstruating for Satan, where they get, you know, feminine products for people that go without, homeless people. The local chapter near me, which is San Antonio, they did their campaign at the beginning of fall, was called Cozy for Buffy. And they actually worked with a local organization called Haven for Hope, and it's a Christian-based organization, which is kind of cool that they, you know, were able, that the Christian organization was like, yeah, we'll do this with you. I think they kind of ran into some closed doors on that, just because they're the Satanic Temple and people get really freaked out by the name.
Yeah, well,
but
it's like if you can combine them and like help people, it's like,
right. Well, that's what they did. Yeah, that's what they did. So the Haven for Hope, what they do is they're a homeless organization, but they also offer treatment for substance abuse. But I've been to the grounds before, and I've seen, and they've got housing units. You know, they've got areas where they hold meetings and do, you know, classes and things like that. And so it's a hand up for people that really need it. And so the goods that the Satanic Temple was able to get donated through their campaign was distributed to the Haven for Hope, who then got it to homeless people that were in need of it. So, like, I mean, it's pretty cool.
They're like, why are you so mad at us? Is it because they're Satan? It's the temple. No, it's because you're helping homeless people. That's
right. And so I want to say that because, like, while I'm talking about, you know, the Order of the Nine Angles, and while we're talking about how there's some misogynistic undertones in some of the satanic communities, I really don't want people to be like, and you identify as a Satanist, why? Like, that sounds horrible. Because there's a lot of good out there too.
But I think, and, you know, as a footnote, there's going to be more of the positive than there is of the negative. But yeah, I did want to touch on that because I know, and not just you, but I've seen it, you know, before, where people are like, you know, there are the problematic things as long as you look at them. But it's the same thing when you talk about like some of the Norse like things. Like if you were all like, oh, I'm gonna like dive into this, and then you start searching, like you're gonna come across some neo-Nazis because they took that shit. It doesn't.
It's very unfortunate. It's very unfortunate. Yeah. I hate how they do that.
And it doesn't mean that, oh my God, like I can't, you know, buy this Odin statue because there's some fucking pricks that are using it. Like, no, I mean, if the church can use Jesus to do a bunch of bad shit, there's going to be people that are going to use like, and you know, it's just bullshit. Be aware of it. Make sure you don't like start following, you know, do your research, look for groups that are like, wait a minute, this doesn't sound right. But don't let it stop you, because there's so much positive and there's so much good, especially if you're being called to, you know, Satan.
Right. And so the conversation that I have with a lot of other satanic, which is like, you know, Maisie, she's in our chat also. And like, she and I talk about this stuff a lot, and we share a lot of the same beliefs, like being that in between the non-theistic and theistic. You know, we both like working with, you know, the 72 demons of the Goetia. If you're familiar with that. And so we kind of will like share resources back and forth. Like she sent me the Occult Tarot by Travis McHenry, which is a really cool tarot deck where he actually, I mean, it's a full tarot deck. So he does the 72 demons from, you know, the keys, the greater and lesser keys of Solomon.
Mm-hmm.
And the remaining 4, he brings in, he does Lucifer is one, Baphomet, Beelzebub, and then one more. I can't remember who the 4th one is, but it makes a whole complete deck. So you can do like a typical tarot reading with it. But if you read the book, and I always read the book, especially when it's stuff that has to do with demons and things like that, always read the books, guys. If you read the book, he kind of warns you. He's like, you can use this as a tarot deck, but like, just know that it's not a normal tarot deck, because each card represents a specific entity, a demon, an ancient entity. So that's basically what demons are, right? Like,
Yeah,
you can believe in the demons without thinking that they're from the Christian hell.
right. Just
So
start drawing sigils. Don't read about them.
right. Well, he shows you how to do this reading, and like how the spread is that he shows you is how you're basically doing a reading, but you're also asking for something, from the demon in specific that you're asking it of. And also warns you that you've got to pay your price. You got to make sure that you do your offering, and like what kind of offerings those should be and stuff. And I've had a few different people that have gotten that deck and have used it without reading the book and without realizing all of that stuff. And they're like, why is this weird stuff happening? And I'm like, well, did you read the book?
Yeah.
And they're like, well, no.
I really wanted to do this deck, but I did. There's like 100 demons in my house now.
Right. I was like, well, so my first piece of advice to you, is to look at whatever demon you had at this number card in the spread, and then look up what offerings it likes, and then that's probably what you need to do. But so anyways, Maisie kind of had turned me onto that deck, and like we've talked about different authors that we like, and then one that we really like right now is S. Connolly. I'm actually reading her book Wart Cunning for Demonology, and it's pretty cool. It's kind of has like the green witch aspects, right? Like those of you that like to work with plants, I love to work with plants, but there's really a lack of that representation for that specifically within the left-hand path. And so she kind of touches on that, which is super cool. So there's some good authors out there. You just gotta, you just gotta search.
Yeah. And I think like anything starting out, those searches are going to take you to the most common things. But then, when you start getting into it, if you're serious about it, you'll find the other stuff, and you'll kind of find your path, as it were, along that. Because we were talking about before how, there's plenty of people out here that misquote or pretend like they know what they're talking about. And the next thing you know, they're telling you how, the Satanic Temple is literally worshiping the devil. Or
or like you can tell they haven't done the research. They're just like looking at the website and reading it, and like, okay, like, yeah.
Well, I'm from the South, and I really like, and this kind of ties into, and I'm not going to go into it because it's not even out yet, but I am reading it, is Corey of New World Witchery's book. And, they talk about this relationship in the folklore of like, many different ones, but of course the one that speaks to me the most is like the mountain magic or granny magic and stuff. And it's like this idea that, a witch is, whether you believe it's the actual biblical Satan or not, that a witch has to, like, a witch can't be a witch unless she like gives herself or accepts like the gift from the devil. And a lot of what, we just had like a 3-part on familiars. And I like that idea because, it's like, now do I think like my familiar was gifted to me by Old Scratch? Like maybe, no, but no, I like that idea that to me, it's something bigger than just one entity. Does that make sense? Like, to me, it's like these people go out and you talk to the horned one, or you get it gifted.
Right. It's like Sabrina. You sign the Dark Lord's book.
Yes.
You sign your name in the book.
But didn't I though? Like, even though I didn't say like, hey, Satan, it's your boy. It's like I went into nature and I asked for it, basically. Right, and to me, the horned one, the devil, is like nature at its more primal, more like animalistic side. And
Yes.
like when you talk about like whether it's like maybe the wild hunt, or you have these like these ideas of Green Man and Pan and all these things. Like I think that's something that's often overlooked, because when you hear Satanism, you hear that like that classic, and I get, again, I think it's the LaVey influence, is like high ritual magic, and it's all blood and robes and sacrifice,
Yes.
orgies and pentagrams, and it's like, yeah, that's cool, bro, but that too, but also like being out in nature and like the things that reside out there, whether
Yeah.
it's tricksters or other things. So I think like when I went out into the and even though I think it's a gift tied to Hecate, or a partnership built through that, I do think like that's kind of where I got my familiar is, I asked the devil, in quotations, I asked, and to me, I look at the devil in how I work with it or him, um, as this kind of that force that is behind, because like let's be honest, the idea of religion, especially when you talk about Christianity and stuff like that, is very like anti-nature, and for good reason, because of paganism and things like this, but and they don't give a fuck, you know what I mean?
Right.
But like I see it as that like other part of connection with nature on a deeper, like darker, more like you're in the shit level. So yeah, I do think there is something to be said about that idea that like lore says, and of course it's anti-Christian is the other idea, but that the lore that says you can't be a witch unless you basically ask the devil to gift it to you. And that's how I view the devil, and kind of like that nature kind of trickster. And I know that's not necessarily a southern thing, but like the devil is in like folk music, it's in some of this like this lore and stuff, and to me that's what I think of when I think the devil, not Satan, but that word, the devil, you know what I mean? Like
Right.
to me that's
Right.
what it means. So do you think of, when you work with Satan, in your denomination of Satanism, no, when you work with Satan, like do is it kind of in that role of like student, and I want to take in all this knowledge, and I want you to show me like the mysteries, like that's kind of how I view Hecate. um is it that kind of
Yes.
people, or is it kind of
Yeah,
like,
definitely. Yeah, definitely. That would be an accurate way to describe it. And I think that, the big tie with, Satan and Hecate, I mean, they're both chthonic, right? Like they're both those underworld, those deities of the underworld. So it kind of stands to reason that the two would be so close, but for me, so closely tethered, and kind of work in an orchestra for me,
Mhm.
which took me a long time to realize it, or maybe I did realize it. And like I said, like I just kind of was like, not so much weirded out myself, but just weirded out about how I would be perceived by my husband, by my friends in the witch community. Because honestly, like the witch community isn't always as open minded as we would like for it to
It's
be.
not. It's not. It can be very like exclusive, especially when you have that mindset
Yes.
of like, well, this is what I think a witch is, and it's like it's this, and it's like, no, it's not always the little white girl in Salem on Instagram. Like that's not,
Right. It's not
and
it. And it's not all, Wiccan centric, right? Like
that's not to say that
that
those are
seems
invalid, but those are
no,
certain.
they're not. Yeah, they're not. Right.
But I think
Right.
there's people from the, and I want to say the outside, or like the very edges, that when they see witchcraft and they see it on social media and they see this stuff, they like they get this idea, and then anything else is kind of like just do the work. Um, and that's not to say that these people that post these pictures, or all this, but I think from people seeing that, those are popular and those trend, and the aesthetic is,
Right.
and I think they assume maybe too much. um
Right.
and of course
Right.
you
And they
also,
have their preconceived notion of
yeah,
what witchcraft is to them at that moment.
right.
And another thing too is a lot of like the newer witches or baby witches or people that are just coming into, working their path and working with witchcraft, a lot of them come from a Christian background. And it takes a long time to kind of break that, like what's been indoctrinated into you.
It
I know
does.
for me, like I brought up, being raised Catholic, I still, and I talk to my boss about this all the time. My boss is, she's very Christian, and I totally respect that about her. But her kind of Christianity is different from what I grew up with. She didn't grow up going to church and stuff, so she's like all about Jesus. You know what I mean? Like all about Jesus, kind of like one of those. I don't want to say super liberal Jesus freaks, but she's on the more leftist side, kind of Jesus
Right.
Christian
Which is
freak,
weird
right?
because
Which
like,
which which I kind of, I have more respect for that.
oh, 100%. And like, as much as I joke about organized religion as a whole, like, in the South, we get a lot of like the pro-Trump, the like gun-toting
Mm-hmm.
conservatives,
Yes.
where you almost forget that Jesus is even a figure in their beliefs. They
Yeah,
might,
I don't even know how that that's kind of where it is. I live in Texas, and so that's absolutely how it is. I mean,
yeah,
we
that's
still
right.
got
Because
people
you're like,
still yeah,
you're
I'm
in
in Texas,
different,
so we
you're in
still
the,
got people with their Trump flags flying in the yards, and like, so you're all going to keep those up for the next 4 years?
oh yeah, it's
Probably
gonna
they
be
will.
like, it'll be the Confederate flag version, because it's like,
Right.
good 4 years,
Right.
it's over. It was, but you're in the South too, but a different South, 100%.
Yeah, but it's super. I mean, it's very conservative. I mean, what's cool about this election was that we saw like a lot of the cities in Texas actually turn blue, which is pretty cool. It's the outlying areas like where I live. Like I'm like an hour outside of San Antonio, so I'm in a rural area, and it's just a very very conservative mindset. But oh yeah, just before we go too far down that rabbit hole, so what I'm saying is, for me, like even though I have been practicing witchcraft in some form for 20 years, I was raised Catholic. And there's a lot of times in my life where something happens and my first response to that is to feel guilty about it or feel shame, you know, for just being human. Like I don't believe that I need salvation from anything. And I don't believe that I'm inherently bad because I was born human. Like that original sin concept is just fucking ridiculous. But I still, because I was raised that way for so long, and it was just kind of like permeated into my being, my brain, like over and over and over, feel guilty if, for, your sexual urges, feel guilty for this, feel guilty for that, feel guilty for that. Sometimes I feel guilty for something. I'm like, you know what? Like, I'm almost 40 years old and I don't believe that shit. I don't need to be feeling guilty about it, but it's my first response. So I think that when you have people that are coming into witchcraft as newer practitioners, and a lot of them are coming from that background, they've still got a lot of work to do in themselves to break away from that. You know what I mean? And they
Yeah.
might be there, in a year from now or 5 years now or whatever. But like, just like the rest of us, like we're all still trying like to work and to heal and to
Right.
move past that,
Now,
which was indoctrinated into us.
before I did witchcraft, I, was agnostic, almost atheist for a long time, and that's when I was like, and that reverber, like it's still there, not now, but for a while after, there's still that like, you don't realize how much it brainwashes you and how much it like permeates your entire existence. And
Yes.
when you like the thing about the devil and witchcraft and stuff, and why I think there's such like, so the whole point of the original sin is to make you need something, to make you unworthy, and to make you try to gain worthiness from something outside of yourself,
Right.
which
Right.
is how control and religion works.
Right. You're always atoning. You're forever atoning for just, being the horrible trash human that you are, that
and
you were
like, let's
born
be
as.
real, like Jesus was never like, that's how it works, but that's how it's been,
Yeah.
I always have seen Jesus different from the Christian idea of God. Then I think he got lumped in with that shit, and he did not belong to it. That's not the God he talked about, not the Old Testament God and all that shit. But that's a whole different episode. But
Oh, right. Yeah. Oh, yeah.
I think the reason, like the devil and witchcraft, because witchcraft is a self-empowerment, whether you follow a
Hmm.
deity or not. And I think when you start out, you think, well, I need a deity to practice. You don't.
Yeah,
And
but
I
you
think
don't.
that's kind of carried over. And I think deities want to work with us, but my point has been too, in following Hecate after so long, is in the beginning it was kind of like, I don't always involve her. I think she's always present when I'm doing witchcraft, but I don't always involve her, in the sense that I feel like it's expected and kind of like,
You
well,
mean like as in an invocation sense?
right.
Like
Yeah.
when you're doing spell works? Yeah, I very rarely invoke, to
And
be honest. Any
I think it's more that she's like, you know, I mean, she's a goddess of spirits. So, and I'm a big, advocate of witches trying to work with spirits, whether you see them or not, whether you feel them, but to work with spirits around you and stay, local and, work with those things around you. And I think you get more accomplished when you do that than if you think it always has to revolve around a deity. But I think those are like, there's very like, um, what's the word I'm looking for? Like there's a lot of promising, or there's a lot to gain from working with deities, but you don't have to be a witch. Of course, you can be an atheistic witch. You can, do the whole, and I mean, like I said, my practice is more animism at this point. Um,
right.
and of course, I still have, workings with Hecate, but yeah, I don't feel the need to call her and invoke her each time I do a spell. I don't. Hell, you're lucky if I call a circle. I mean, I work on my protection.
Well,
You know what I
honestly,
mean?
I don't think that Hecate wants you to. Like I think she'd be like, okay, like I've got shit to do. You know
Yes.
what I mean? Like I can't be like popping in every time you need to do a little road opener or whatever
But
the fuck.
Jesus Christ, I'm
Like
busy.
like have I not taught you anything, my children?
Yes. And
You
it's like
know?
the same thing as like, oh, I think Jesus hears every prayer I have. No,
Yeah, yeah, right.
but I think the reason is the devil and witchcraft not only go hand in hand because of that Christianized, like demonized thing, but I think they go hand in hand because witchcraft is self-empowering. The archetype of the devil, of Satan, of Lucifer is and Hecate with that knowledge and that like, question things and do all that.
Well,
So
and the empowerment and some of the other
so
things that I see as tethered there between them is the sovereignty and the
yeah.
autonomy
So
and
I think
this and
that
self empowerment.
I think it's natural for when you get into witchcraft, like you're gonna be like, who's that guy over there? And want to like, I mean, who didn't want to learn about the devil before you became a witch? But I think there's that like that pull to that too because of that claim to self-empowerment. And there's so many ways to go about it. Whether that's, I have a Baphomet on an altar, or whether you have um so I like there's a podcast called Old Gods of Appalachia. And like when I talk about the devil, I love the imagery, like my idea of the devil in the forest and in nature and that darker aspect is like this like black stag with like these like glowing eyes and like I think it's amber horns or antlers. And it's like just seeing like maybe a black stag in a misty forest just kind of standing there, like it's cold, you can see the breath come out of its nose and stuff. Like that's what conjures up in my head when I think
I
the
love that.
of my practice. And
Yeah,
and I
yeah.
don't really work with the devil per se by name, but that's the idea and the energy that I feel when I say the devil. And I'm like, oh, I'm out here in the woods talking to Sasquatch and the devil, which I'm sure they're friends. They've got to be.
Oh, gotta be, gotta be.
But that's fine too. If you like, I think you're still working with that same archetype because you're still looking for the mysteries. You're still like self-empowering. You're trying to harmonize with nature, as is the like Baphomet, like the aesthetic that we talked about earlier. Like I think those are still, you can still work with that same like entity in that same way. But I guess my point is like the horned one is kind of like intertwined between a lot of witchcraft, and that's why you get people going towards Satanism and looking into it and stuff, because it's nature, it's primal, it's free will, it's that like free thought and empowerment. So of course that's what the devil's all about.
Yeah, absolutely. And and I'm glad that you brought up Baphomet because I have people ask me questions about Baphomet too. And like you can either, work with Baphomet as an entity because Baphomet is its own entity. I mean, at one point, Baphomet was made synonymous, the imagery was made synonymous with that of the devil. But the truth is Baphomet is Baphomet, you
Yeah,
know?
that
Church of Satan and
imagery.
Satanic
Yeah,
Temple both use Baphomet to represent Satan, but it's not. It's Baphomet, and so what's cool about Baphomet is Baphomet, is both male and female. Um, the words that are inscribed in Baphomet's arms, solve et coagula, or to separate and join together. Basically, to me, it's kind of like chemistry. Like, you know, it's like birth through destruction. And
Yeah.
so I always considered Baphomet to represent duality.
Yeah.
The male and the female parts, the birth and destruction being hand in hand, you know. And so I like to work with Baphomet as an entity as well. And I probably work with Baphomet as an entity more than any others, like when I am doing spell work. And I don't really say that I invoke, but I definitely invite the energy to be present, just because it's, you know, as above, so below. And I feel like it encompasses spellcraft so poignantly,
Yeah.
working with Baphomet. It just goes for me.
Well, I think, yeah, and you know, the imagery, of course, is not the devil, but yeah, it is tied, and I mean, you know, it works, but yeah, you're like you said, it's
Yeah, it was
not
work.
meant.
It was the sabbatic goat painting that did it. It was, I think, Ephias Levi. I can't
Mhm.
remember when it was. I think should probably look it up. I think it was maybe in the 1800s, but it was a while back, and that was kind of like the most famous picture of Baphomet, and that was the beginning of it being related to the devil. And then whenever Anton LaVey did what he did in the 60s, just kind of sealed the deal.
Yeah.
And Baphomet was forever the devil to some people, because so many people that are, you know, just like your mainstream average Joes will see Baphomet like a picture on TV or whatever, and like, oh, the devil. And like, I get so frustrated for Baphomet, like, fucking Baphomet. You know what I mean? Like,
Right.
fucking Baphomet. Baphomet deserves respect for being Baphomet.
Yeah. Well, it's the same thing where people think Jesus was white, I guess. It's like,
Yeah,
no,
yeah,
but there was never a real Jesus. But yes, you can work with, and that's the other thing too, is like if that imagery is calling you, then like maybe it's not necessarily the devil,
right,
but maybe it's Baphomet.
right, yeah. And a lot of people do work with Baphomet, and that would not necessarily, you know, identify as satanic or even necessarily the left hand path. They just resonate with
Yeah.
that image and that spirit and the energy that Baphomet represents.
I can take that symbolism too, even without like connecting to this deity on a spiritual level, and use it as that self-empowerment. Um, so I think that it's a good, like a good, I don't want to keep saying archetype, but even if you don't want to work with the devil hands-on like you do other deities, like I think there's a lot to learn from Satan, the devil, Lucifer, and all these different things, because in the end it's all about self-empowerment, and so is witchcraft.
Absolutely.
Yeah, so we're like, for, I guess it doesn't even feel like it, but so we're coming up on an hour. This will be a two-part, but I think in the next part I want to talk more about like how you practice with the left hand path, and like some like suggestions and things. And I mean, you don't have to tell us your day to day, like I wake up and I leave a cookie for Baphomet. But well, yeah, go check out her stuff because it's really good. Check out her shop, follow her on Instagram, and then listen in 2 weeks when part 2 drops. We're just going to keep talking, but to you it's going to feel like there was a break in
Yes.
between, and then we'll talk about like your practice and the left hand path and things like that. So hail Satan.
Hail Satan.
All right, goodbye, but not
Bye.
really.